I've gone over the Hunter, and I've gone over the Rogue. So now it's finally time for what you all voted for. The Warrior. When it comes to Warrior macros, the first rule is to include Start Attack in all of your abilities. If Mortal Strike is on cooldown or you don't have enough Rage for Mortal Strike, it's not actually going to start your auto attack, so make sure that you include this. Same thing goes for Sunder Armor and Bloodthirst. All of these abilities can be used in any stance, so you want to keep the macros for them very simple. When it comes to Heroic Strike and Cleave, it's important that you put Start Attack second. If you put it first, you're going to attack with a regular white hit before Heroic Strike has a chance to queue up, and then you're going to have to wait around until your next melee swing. No bueno. When it comes to abilities that require a specific stance, you want to make sure that your macros put you into the correct stance when you press that ability. Now, you might notice that my bars don't change based on what stance I'm in. They are always the same, which means I always have access to my entire toolkit. If I want to disarm someone, I don't have to press defensive stance first and then press disarm. See, that would take time. I simply press disarm and it goes off instantly. I know that combining stuff like Whirlwind, Revenge, and Overpower into one button is very tempting and very popular, but don't be seduced. Your reaction time is going to be much faster than other warriors if you have separate keybinds for these abilities. If I see a mob get away from me and head for my healer, I can intercept and then taunt them without even needing to think about what stance I was in before. I literally just press intercept and then press taunt. If taunt gets resisted, I press mocking blow, and guess what? I'm already in the right stance and it's going off. When you first start playing warrior, it might seem like a good idea to combine intercept and charge into one button based upon whether or not you're in combat. But this is not a good idea. In almost all circumstances, you want to be using charge before intercept if possible, because it means you will have another gap closer if they get away. I'm often in the situation where the last time I got hit was around 4 seconds ago, and I know that if I wait for just that extra second, I'll drop combat and be able to charge, so I'll sit there spamming my button for charge just to get it off as soon as possible, which I wouldn't be able to do if I used this macro, because it would see that I'm still in combat and immediately just default to using intercept. I also see people with a macro like this, which chooses which ability to use based on stances, which sounds like a good idea at first because it saves you on a keybind, right? But this also means that every time you want to charge, you have to press battle stance first and then press charge. But in the time that it takes you to go from one key to the next, even though it's just a few milliseconds, it gives them a chance to hit you, put you into combat, and takes away your chance to charge. It's very important that your button for charge also puts you into battle stance, so that way it goes off instantly, which makes combining it with intercept obviously not an option, as much as I would like to. This leads me to the next thing I want to explain, which is that the best ability to combine with charge is not Hamstring. I know this seems weird, but hear me out. Hamstring can be used in both Battle Stance and Berserker Stance, which creates the problem of, if I include Battle Stance in my charge, how do I use Hamstring while I'm in Berserker Stance if my Hamstring charge button puts me into Battle Stance? The solution? Overpower. Charge and Overpower both require Battle Stance only in Classic, so combining them allows you to still save a keybind and makes your reaction time with both abilities instantaneous, because the macro will immediately put you into the correct stance. So Charge Overpower is better than Charge Hamstring. Now you too have 200 IQ, you're welcome. Oh, and I like to make the Overpower section a mouse over because sometimes when you use Cleave, the Overpower will proc on your secondary target. So if I see Overpower is procced but it's not going off, I don't have to figure out which mob actually dodged, I can just start mousing over all of them and spamming Overpower. I suppose you could also make the Charge a mouse over as well, but I prefer not to. The Blizzard UI only tracks your Overpower when you're in Battle Stance. So if you want to see when it procs in Berserker Stance, you'll need to download an add-on like Maycore Overpower Alert, or track it using the add-on Weak Auras. Personally, I like to use a similar add-on called Tell Me When, because I like that it uses less CPU than Weak Auras, but Weak Auras is much more popular. Side note. Anyone that tells you that Weak Auras is objectively better than Tell Me When has literally no idea what they're talking about. Don't listen to them, they're a moron. End side note. When it comes to abilities that can be used in more than one stance, like Hamstring and Rend, You have to choose which stance you want them to default to. If I press Hamstring while I'm in defensive stance, or Form 2, do I want to go into Berserker stance or Battle stance? Now, this is kind of personal preference, but if your focus is DPS or PvP, you want to be in the most aggressive stance possible. But if you're the main tank for your guild, I would suggest using these instead. If you're wondering, stance and form both do exactly the same thing, so I prefer to use form just because it's a bit shorter. If you don't know already, I stream all of my progress on these macros live on Twitch. I'm live right now at twitch.tv/Masha. If you don't believe me, just check out this great clip from last stream that you missed out on. Wow, look at that great content. Go to twitch.tv/Masha. We are live right now. Okay, maybe not right now. It depends on when you watch this, but whatever. You've probably all seen the normal shield equip defensive stance macro. It's pretty simple. If you're about to die, you press this macro and you get tanky. But don't copy this down just yet. I combine this macro with shield block to save on keybinds. Press the macro once and it equips your shield and goes into defensive stance. Press it a second time and it uses shield block. It works this way because I put shield block before defensive stance instead of after it, which means that the first time you press it, you're not going to be in defensive stance yet, and shield block will fail to cast. That way you can avoid wasting rage on shield block in PvP, but you can still spam it to get off a shield block when tanking dungeons. This is obviously more oriented towards PvP and Fury Warriors, because it might delay your shield block by like a millisecond. So if you're the main tank, you can consider putting it in this order instead. But no matter which order you put it in, if you don't have a shield equipped yet when you press the macro, shield block's not going to go off instantly anyways, because it takes a second in-game to equip your shield. So I'm a big fan of putting shield block first so that it always takes 2 presses. If you have Heroic Strike queued up, the game will not allow you to swap to your shield until Heroic Strike goes off, which is a big problem for dual-wielding Fury Prot Warriors who need to equip a shield as quickly as possible when they drop to low health. So /stop casting will cancel Heroic Strike and Cleave, allowing you to equip your shield immediately. But you don't want to cancel your Heroic Strike every time that you use shield block. You only want to cancel Heroic Strike if you are not wearing a shield and therefore trying to equip a shield when you press the macro. I also include a /start attack for good measure, which I've made a bit smarter so that it only goes off if I already have a target, since this is a defensive macro. I use essentially the same macro for shield wall, but make sure that you put defensive stance first on this one, so that shield wall will always go off as quickly as possible. Oh, you thought we were done? We're not done. Every time you get a new shield, you have to go in and update the name of that shield in all of your shield macros. Pretty annoying. But if you want to make it easy on yourself, here's the trick. Make 2 macros, one that equips your shield and one-hander, and one that equips your two-hander, or dual wield if you're a furry, and then drag both of those to an unused corner on your bars. Now go back into all of your shield macros and delete the 2 lines that equip your shield and replace them with this line, which will actually click this exact spot on your bars, which is where we put our macro. You see where I'm going. Now all of your shield macros will click your shield equip macro. How about that? So when you get a new shield, all you have to do is update one macro and it'll update all your macros. If you want to put it in a different spot on your bars, you can use this picture here as a reference. Pro tip, make sure the macro names start with a number, so that way they always show up first in your macro list, making them easier to get to and update. I also like to be specific with the equip slot at 16 and 17, because if you don't, you can run into problems while dual wielding. My Shield Bash macro is very similar, but it has a few differences, because it can be used in 2 stances, so I have it defaulting to battle stance because my focus is PvP. I include the condition worn shields right here, so that way the first time I press the macro, I equip my shield, but I don't actually swap stances until I press it the second time, which is when my shield is already equipped. Once again, if you're the main tank, I would have it default to defensive stance instead. I also have a mouse over version, which I like to use in PvP. It helps a lot to have more than one way of getting into defensive stance. So in my macro for Revenge, I like to place it before defensive stance for the exact same reasons that I did with shield block. It's not going to use Revenge until I press it a second time, but if you're the main tank, put it in this order. If I want to equip my shield and go into defensive stance, I can press shield block once. But if I only want to equip my shield and not change stances so that I can hold on to my rage, I can use shield bash once. If I want to use defensive stance, but I want to keep my two-hander equipped, I can press revenge once. A good example of when I want to do that is when I'm stuck in a Frost Nova. I want to take less damage from the incoming Frostbolt, which means a shield isn't going to be very useful, so I might as well keep my two-hander equipped. You should have separate keybinds for both Pummel and Shield Bash. I know that they both share the same cooldown, but having them on separate keybinds isn't a big deal if you take advantage of this by using Shield Bash as your shield equip macro. Now, that being said, I have made a smarter version of Pummel that will use Shield Bash instead if you were in a circumstance where you should have hit Shield Bash, which is when you are already in the correct stance and have a shield equipped. Shield Bash interrupts for 6 seconds instead of 4, making it much better than Pummel. But this macro is not meant to replace your Shield Bash. If you notice, this macro will never swap you out of Berserker stance, even if you have a shield equipped, because that has the potential to dumpster all of your rage. If you're in Berserker stance already, this will always use Pummel. Now, don't think of this macro as being a combination of Pummel and Shield Bash. Think of this macro as a smarter Pummel, and this macro as Shield Bash. I want to go over a couple more macros that cancel my Heroic Strike. So, hypothetical situation. Let's say you've got 80 rage in battle stance and you have Heroic Strike queued up because you wanted to spend your 80 rage, obviously. But Whirlwind comes up next on your rotation, so you press it. Now you're down to 25 rage because of Tactical Mastery, and immediately spend all of it on Whirlwind. But Heroic Strike is still queued up and attempting to cast. Usually this isn't a big deal, but there's a small chance that you take enough damage before your next melee swing and end up spending 15 rage on Heroic Strike when you really don't have that much rage to spare. Okay, this is probably never going to happen, but it could happen. I do something similar in my execute, but I have it so that it always cancels Heroic Strike. The way I see it, once they fall below 20%, I want to cancel any Heroic Strike or Cleave that I had queued up and immediately spend every available point of rage on execute. Alright, for sweeping strikes, hypothetical situation number 2. Let's say you've got 40 rage in Berserker stance. You press this macro and it swaps you over to battle stance and drops you down to 25 rage. Thank you, Tactical Mastery. But you have to wait for 5 more rage since sweeping strikes cost 30. So that's why if I use this macro to swap stances coming from form 2 or 3, I really want to cancel Heroic Strike so that my next auto attack will generate rage instead of spending it. Now remember, the macro is smart. It's only going to cancel your Heroic Strike if you use this macro to swap stances. If you are already in battle stance, it's not going to bother canceling your Heroic Strike. I also like to include Bloodrage in my sweeping strikes. I didn't think this would be a good idea at first because, I'm going to be honest, there are times where you want to use sweeping strikes but you don't want to use Bloodrage because you already have a lot of rage. In fact, anything above 45 rage to be specific. But this situation almost never happens. I am almost always starved for rage swapping between stances to get to sweeping strikes, which leaves me at a maximum of 25 rage. So like 90% of the time, I swear, I'm spamming both of these abilities at the same time, and they don't have a global cooldown, so having them on the same keybind is just really nice. The conditions before Bloodrage are extremely important though. If you start spamming this macro right after a stance change, your stances are going to be on a 1-second global cooldown. So this makes sure that Bloodrage does not activate until you actually swap over into battle stance, removing any chance of using it before swapping and wasting that 10 rage. I include the combat condition because there are times where I have a lot of rage built up before a fight, and I want to use sleeping strikes before I charge in, but Bloodrage would have put me into combat, so this way it doesn't. I also want to say that this macro does not completely replace my Bloodrage. You should still have a separate keybind for it on your bars for when you want to use it with other abilities like Intercept. I had sweeping strikes before Bloodrage at first, because I thought to myself if I'm at 100 rage, I could potentially waste that rage before spending it. But there's actually a small delay in game before the 10 rage is generated. So I put it first in the macro now because I want to get through that 0.5 second delay as quickly as possible. And it will always use sweeping strikes before the 10 rage is generated if you already had enough rage. So you don't need to worry about potentially wasting that 10 rage even though it's first in the macro. Here's a couple more basic start attack macros. It's a really good idea to put into all of your shouts. On Battle Shout and Bloodrage, I've made it a bit smarter so that if I press it out of combat before a fight, I'm not going to auto-target and get myself into trouble. I've combined Berserker Rage and Berserker Stance to save on Keybinds. I use this macro anytime I just want to swap into Berserker Stance without casting any abilities. Again, I have it in this order for the same reasons I did with Shield Block. Berserker Rage is not going to be cast until you press it a second time. When I'm low on Rage, I use this macro right after charging in to make sure that I get into Berserker Stance before my melee attack goes off. That way I can spend 30 Rage on Mortal Strike with an extra 3% crit. It's also really nice being able to press it once to get ready for an incoming fear, and then press it a second time if the fear lands. If the fear doesn't go through or gets resisted, I didn't waste my Berserker Rage unnecessarily. I'm able to do this because obviously Berserker Rage can be used while feared, but only if you are already in Berserker Stance. This macro just combines all of the different ranged weapons into one button, making it so you never have to update your bars whenever you get a new weapon. There are many reasons you would want to cancel Bloodrage early to drop combat, but the biggest ones are obviously to mount up, eat food, or to cast charge. All things that can only be done out of combat. So anytime I want to cancel Bloodrage, I can just hit my keybind for mount, and I'll drop combat much faster. If you used Bloodrage right before killing someone, canceling it early unfortunately will not take you out of combat until its duration would have been over. I'm not sure why, that's just the way it is. But if you used Bloodrage on accident, which I do all the time, and Bloodrage is specifically what placed you into combat in the first place, canceling it early will drop combat and allow you to use your charge or get on your mount. /Cancelaura Bladestorm is what I use to cancel the proc of Ravager. That way anytime it procs and I really need to move or I'm attacking a single target, it's really easy to just cancel it. All I have to do is press mount. I can't even imagine trying to level using this weapon if I didn't have this macro. Intimidating Shout does not auto-target by default, which is super annoying when you want to get off a quick AoE fear. So making it target the closest enemy means I don't have to click on them myself. I like to make my Intimidating Shout stop my auto attack, that way I can get off a quick bandage in PvP, as normally Intimidating Shout does not stop your auto attack. This is a simple mouse over taunt macro. It's extremely useful for tanking. I also want my taunt to start my auto attack, but I don't want it to auto target, so including these conditions after start attack makes it so it will never target for me. I also like to make my Mocking Blow a mouse over as well. I was asked to include my warrior keybinds in this video, so here they are. If you're the main tank or the off tank for your guild, I would recommend having your Sunder Armor place you into defensive stance. You want to spend as much time in defensive stance as possible when you're the tank because it has a higher threat ratio. Whenever I'm tanking a dungeon, I'll swap out my normal Sunder Armor for this one, and I move around my keybinds because I know I'm going to be pressing Sunder Armor a whole lot more. That's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you haven't already, go to twitch.tv/Misha and follow the live stream because I know you didn't do it yet. Don't think I didn't notice. If you'd like to see more videos like this, please subscribe. And if you'd like to support the channel, make sure you go and check me out on Patreon. I'm not sure yet which video I'll finish next, but I am working on quite a few, so don't worry, more to come.